Now, as I said, I'm here today at the CHESS conference, the Christian Home Educators Support Service contest, so I can be Christian, unlike at other venues sometimes. So, I wanted a picture of Jesus. That could be controversial. So there you are. There's my summary of Jesus. Right? So when you see that picture, that's Jesus. That's a representation of him. And I've got a question. I like asking questions, as you'll discover. Did the incarnate Son of God live a countercultural life? I'm going to give you three possible answers. Who wants to say yes? Hands up. Who wants to say no? Who wants to say prefer not to say? Okay, well, that was quite overwhelming in favour. And really, I do want to stress this. This is about, as disciples of the anointed Saviour, who happen to be home educators, are we as countercultural as we need to be? So there's a little picture of somebody swimming against the tide. And my basic thing for all home educating families is that elective family-based learning, and by the way, home education has become a very blurred word these days. The government use it for anything that happens, any education that happens outside of a registered school. So anybody who uses online tutoring is home educating. And I want to stress that real home education is family-based learning. So that's why I'm throwing that one. And I would say that is countercultural in most countries. Oh, by the way, who wants to tell me what the difference is between a shoal, a school, and a pod? In other words, is my picture a shoal of fish, a school of fish, or a pod of fish? Anybody wants to give me the technical differences? I didn't think so. So I found a marine biologist who tells us that when fish, shrimp, or any aquatic creatures swim together in a loose cluster, this is typically a shoal. It can be a mix of different species. A school is a group of the same fish species swimming together in synchrony, turning, twisting, forming, etc. Pods are herds of marine mammals, including whales, dolphins. Do you know, I thought there was something significant about that definition of a school of aquatic animals. Schools are designed to get people all doing the same thing, right? And that's one reason why home education is countercultural. But if you want to be countercultural, you want to know what I mean by it, the first question is, what is culture? Who wants to give me a definition of culture? I am going to pause. Brave person? Are you? Yes, go on.
It's a set of shared norms, ideals, beliefs, practices of a group of people.
Right. Anybody got a different definition? Or? There we breathe. Mm-hmm. No, not as sure about that, but anybody else? Okay, that's not a bad one. One definition I found is the ideas and physical objects or things that represent a group or society, or the way of life of a people, including their attitudes, values, beliefs, their blah blah. Cultural features or forms of life are learned, but are often too pervasive to be readily noticed from within. And that is something that I think is key when it comes to culture. Things that we learn, but we don't realize we've learned them. But somebody else said, defining the term culture is very challenging. It has been described as both a notoriously overboard concept and a notoriously ambiguous concept. Very difficult. Yes, Charles. Laws.
I think laws are important in the country.
You said right. Laws. Right. So when you can't define something, I'm sure as home educators, you all know about etymology. Right? Go to the meaning of the word and it helps you. Right? I find that website really useful, Etymonline. And the word culture started its life about tilling the land, preparing the earth for crops, from Latin, right? Cultivating agriculture. Then from crops and plants, it transferred to fish. Hence my picture earlier, right? No, it wasn't really, that's just the thing. It moved on to fish, oysters, and then when we got into the scientific age, into the production of bacteria and things like that. Right, and that was in the late 1800s. So that's where it began. By the way, I like telling people, because it always confuses me, the black thing behind the brown ox is another ox. It's not a big shadow that looks really odd. Right? Every time I look at that picture, I think, is that its shadow? No, it's not. It's a black one at the back. But then we move on, and this is where it's important. Oh, by the way, I did forget to say, all these slides are on that page I gave you the link to, so you can get them as a PDF. The figurative sense of cultivation through education. Systematic improvement and refinement of the mind comes in about the 1500s. But it wasn't common before the 19th century. Meaning, learning and taste, the intellectual side of civilization by 1805. And so on. So you see, it began with what you do with crops, and it's moved to what you do with people. But it isn't what people do for themselves, it's what others do for them. And here's a picture. I found this online. It's a book. I have to say, for some reason, the website are taking it down in December. But I found that graphic really useful, you see, because it's got 4 things round the picture. And underneath it, it says this: schools ideally perform many important functions in modern society. These include socialization. Now, I'll pause at that word. I know it's an American spelling, but is that what this guy means, and who wrote this book, is that what you mean when somebody says, what about socialization? You think they mean, do they have friends? No. To politicians, to sociologists, socialization means, do they match what the modern society wants people to be? Right? If you've not dropped, that penny's not dropped for you before today, I hope it does today. Socialization is, do they fit in? And see what follows as we go around the thing. Social integration, social placement, and then a feedback loop of social and cultural innovation. Above gives an example of the last one, social and cultural innovation. And it says scientists cannot make important scientific discoveries, and artists can't do their work, etc., unless they have first been educated in the many subjects they need to know for their chosen path. I'm not sure that's right. I think you do need to be equipped, but the many subjects you need to know. A friend of mine, he runs the Centre for Self-Managed Learning. He did some research, and roughly people in industry reckon they use less than 10% of what they learnt at school in daily life. So what's this about? Socialization is shaping people to fit in with society. Is that what we should be doing as Christians? Which society? So my quick, simple definition is customs, attitude of culture is customs, attitudes, and things which are familiar and therefore normal to a group of people at any given time in any given location. But is that what's normal? Any answers? Is what we do today, culturally do today, normal? No, no, no. Good. Anybody here last year? Because I used these pictures then. Right? Sorry if you know. This is what was normal to me. I was brought up in a street in my first 3 or 4 years of life that looked like one of those. I can't remember exactly which. A Yorkshire mill town. The buildings are covered with soot from the factories and the chimneys, and that was it. When I was 5, we moved here. The picture on the right is what the street looked like there. The yellow arrow is the gate of the bungalow I lived in. 40 years earlier, it looked like that. The obvious difference, there's a lot of differences, but notice horse and cart, car. Right? One big change in 40 years. One was normal then, the other was more normal later. In fact, I rarely saw a horse and cart unless it was the rag and bone man. Right? Again, 2 pictures. This is just up the road. The previous picture was taken from about there. A junction, I knew it well as a kid, but very different in 10 years' time, in between 10 years. Oh, and again, another horse and cart and more cars. Even in 10 years, normal had begun to change. Familiar changes very quickly over time. That's courtesy of Google Street View. That's what those 2 spots look like now. I'll leave you to think about that. That's a catalyst for you to say, is what I'm doing normal or is it just familiar? I mean, look at me. Look what I'm dressed in. Anybody here remember duffel coats? Anybody went to school in a duffel coat? Where are they today? Boy, they were heavy. Right. Familiar feels normal, but it isn't. It's just familiar. The problem is that most people believe familiar is the best. People who reject that notion find themselves having to choose to live in ways which are counter to the prevailing culture. And I'm not saying which at this point, this is just a fact about anybody who chooses to live differently. My last time I did this at the health event, I had a lady talk to me afterwards who was a rampant vegan. Right? That's her choice. Right? She tried to persuade me that meat was bad for me. I just said, no, meat's not bad. Maybe how much we eat in the West is bad, but meat's not bad. And I wouldn't let her have that ground, right? So, okay. I want to move on now to the fact that benefit is a philosophical choice. What do I mean by that? Your philosophical brackets faith convictions, whether they are secular or spiritual, are the foundation of your values. Your values determine what you consider to be good and what you consider to be bad. What you see as good and bad determines what you consider to be of benefit and what you think is harmful. Oh, by the way, why am I saying this? The government keeps telling people they've got to keep standards up in education. But actually, by keeping standards up, what they mean is we want children to be taught our values. right? If they can teach facts without teaching values, it wouldn't be so bad. But nobody can teach facts without teaching values. So finally, here's the key point. By nature, as people, we're prepared to invest in what we believe is beneficial and less willing to expend ourselves on what we believe is harmful. The one exception to all that is when we're under compulsion. You feel it, right? Let's be honest. You're in the shops and somebody says to you, oh, I think it's really good that we've had a sexual revolution. And you're in a hurry. Do you want to take the time to say, yeah, I agree with you, or do you want to really say, I'm not sure about that? Compulsion can be that. Brothers and sisters around the world are living under persecution in Iran, China, and many other places. Why are they being persecuted? Because people want to compel them to change their values. So sometimes people will take on board that which is harmful because they think by doing so there'll be less harm. But mostly when we've got a free choice, we invest in what we think is beneficial. So I want to say that the decision to opt out of the state's free education system and to educate your own children is usually done through an informal but serious cost-benefit analysis. And I'm sure you all have done that. Somewhere, whether you realised it was a cost-benefit analysis or not, that is what you've done. Families who have chosen family-based learning have decided that the benefits of doing so outweigh the costs. In contrast to this, most families just go along with the normal. You've all chosen, I can say it here, you've all chosen an abnormal way to live in our society. All right? There's a very large variety of reasons why families choose family-based education. We don't have all to be the same, hence lots of different coloured bobbins there. We don't have to agree hardly on anything at all. We don't even have to agree on what the benefits are, but we do have to believe that the benefits are worth the costs. And I spend a lot of my time not just defending Christians' right to home educate, because if I did that, I actually believe we'd lose it. We have to defend everybody's right to home educate, no matter whether we agree with them on their values or not. Right? But here's something. I'm no great fan of George Bernard Shaw, but I do like what he said here. The reasonable man adapts himself to the world. The unreasonable one persists to adapt the world to himself. Therefore, all progress depends on the unreasonable man. Dear, did you marry an unreasonable man? Yes, Mary knows why I like that one, but I do put it actually. You have to have backbone if you're going to live differently. Reminder, that's where you can get all the slides, or as a PDF, the video of the previous one. Remember this? We're all agreed Jesus was countercultural, yeah? My question then, are you thinking more whether you're as countercultural as you need to be? Let's have a think. A 3D opportunity. What do I mean by that? It's a terrible graphic. I was in a rush when I did it. Okay, some Angel Delight, if you don't recognise it. The genuine, not Angel Delight, Turkish Delight. The genuine Turkish stuff, right? It's great to make mistakes, isn't it? You don't need me to prove I'm a human, do you? Okay, delights of teaching your own children. Who wants to come up with some? Quick fire answers, please. Shout them out, wave your hand.
You watch them grow, you can cater to your own children's needs.
Yeah.
Developing relationships.
Developing relationships. You choose what you teach them. You know what they're being taught. You see the light bulbs. Lots and lots of delights, isn't there? Right? Anybody else want a quick one before I move on? Build a relationship. You get to play with the Lego. Yeah, that's fun for a point, Chris. The time when you play. I wish you didn't have to build another windmill. Okay, difficulties. And I don't know if you can see that fish's face, but it really doesn't look like it's enjoying swimming up that weir. What are the difficulties of home education? You have to make everything happen.
There's no cleaning stuff.
Right? Yeah. Yeah.
Other parents criticize.
They don't, do they? Anybody here you want to point out? Oh, school parents. Ah, yes. What's other difference? Single income, big one today. The in-laws. That's the big one. That is the big one. Stick at it. Keep going. They'll come round. Yeah. Yeah. Anybody else? I want to talk about one. We've touched on it in a way. Last year, I met some Danish world schoolers. I met them again this year at F. And during the year, between the two things, he posted this on social media. The idea that our society is best served when all family members separate in the morning to do things they generally don't enjoy could be the biggest fallacy ever imprinted upon the human mind. They live in a large Mercedes type van and travel the world, so they are together an awful lot. Somebody, and I didn't get her permission, so there's no names here, posted this in the comments, right? She was raised as a feminist career hunter. She realised in her 40s how weird it was that her parents never talked about her brother and herself taking over the farm. She spent decades travelling the world looking for an intentional community until she woke up to the fact. So she went back to her parents and said, I've got money. Let's create a big fat guild for our kin. I like that phrase. I don't know what she means by it quite. I'm not co-parenting with the state anymore. I definitely like that phrase. And I want our legacy to be that our children will never know what it means to communicate to a cubicle for a commute to a cubicle for a mortgage. I really do like that. But the punchline, she went on to say, how many of you understand American here? They're still drunk on the Kool-Aid and they don't want to. I broke up with the state for nothing, back to looking for a surrogate family. I felt so gutted. Right? Why? Well, you see, I'm a baby boomer, born 1951, if you want to know precisely. I'm in that generation. My parents, and to some extent, my grandparents had all gone down what she calls the Kool-Aid route, right? And I was there, and it's her parents are probably my age. My parents bought into the government's cradle to grave offer. They willingly handed over to the state their personal responsibilities. over time, that has not only empowered the state, but it's also taken away agency from individuals. When things go wrong, the state is responsible. When the things go right, most people thank the state for its benevolence, even though they're paying out of their own pockets through their taxes. And if they paid other ways, they might get better value for money. But we're not going there. Consequences are we now live in a culture, stress that word, of dependence on the state. This shows, particularly in the breakdown of the historical family life, not just the nuclear family, but importantly the extended family. This woman's comments hit me because it underlines the place where Western cultures now find themselves in. We put our children in daycare. We call them schools. We put our parents in day and night care, also known as elderly care. I hate signs like that. I think they are a blemish on our society. Right? I wish Christians would wake up to it. Right? We aren't just talking about educating your children. We're talking about going against the prevailing culture. Now, some people may have woken up to both of those during COVID, during the lockdowns. I am thankful for the large number of people who woke up to home education during lockdowns. And I do remember a story, I don't know how many other people said we're changing our lifestyle because it's not been reported, but I do remember one story of one family kidnapping their granny from a care home during lockdowns. Yeah, let's start a revolution. Right? We have a culture where disjointed and broken extended families are considered normal. Right? Education, childcare, elderly care used to exist within the extended family. I just about remember it when I was little. Right? Now we pay strangers and family lives have got rubbish. Right? I strongly believe that the current generation of parents need to reclaim their parenthood, and I've said that here before, and that adult children need to reclaim their parents, no matter how stroppy and difficult they are. Show them love, right? The problem is that many of my baby boomer generation are like the woman whose parents are still drunk on the Kool-Aid, and they don't understand what or why life is broken. Right, another graphic from the internet. I liked it. Taking the path of most resistance often leads to the most reward. Living as Jesus wants us to live, not just. I was brought up in a church that was the church of we don't do. We don't drink, we don't smoke, we don't dance, we don't gamble. The church should be a church of we live differently. We live as Jesus lived. And he said, I only do what I see my Father doing. Right? High bar. It's not law, it's relationship.
Yeah.
Right? But if you want to live as Jesus wants you to live, you'll find there's a lot of pushback. I'm not going to ask for a show of hands. I'm just saying that. I'm back to my third D now. What are the dangers of home educating? Have you ever thought about it? We've done delights, difficulties, now dangers. Get pushed out of society. let me tell you what I think the biggest one is. Chris, you might remember. Do you remember the name of this? Have you? Was this the name? Dr. Sheila Cassidy. You vaguely remember. Anybody else remember that name? I'm showing my age, but never mind. Okay, in 1971, Sheila Cassidy went to Chile to work in a hospital. In 1973, General Pinochet seized power and ruled as a military dictator. In 75, Cassidy was asked to treat a wounded revolutionary, and that led to arrest, torture, and 2 months detention in Chile as a political prisoner. A patient was an opponent of Pinochet's regime. The next day, when she was visiting a friend, the police suddenly began shooting into the house and arrested her. She was beaten, blindfolded, taken to a detention facility where she was stripped and tortured with electric shocks. Sometime later, I heard her on BBC Radio 4, and the presenter asked if she had felt her dignity had been taken away by her torturers. Her reply was to the effect that she had come to realize while in prison that only she could give up her dignity by her response to those who mistreated her. And that's what struck me. You see, we live in a generation that has lost its moral compass. Many of the people who speak up in the media, on social media, challenging what's happening in our society, still lack a moral compass. Right? We need a moral compass. That has got to be found in Christ. It has got to be one that says, only I can give up my dignity. Right? People, whatever somebody does to me, tell me. When Jesus was hanging on that piece of wood at a place called Golgotha, had they taken his dignity away from him? They'd taken his clothes away from him? They'd beaten him. Had they taken his dignity away from him? No. If we are to live counterculturally as disciples of Jesus, they will try and break us. They will do it. The government are trying to do it to home educators. 15 years of attack. Right? They are trying to break us and take our dignity away. The greatest danger we have as Christians, and I say as well as Christian home educators going forward, is the pressure we're going to come under and our reaction to it. You can't stop the pressure, but you can watch how you react. Anybody, I've mentioned them before, anybody recognize these 3 men? Gandhi, Martin Luther King, those are the easy 2. Tolstoy, yes. Right? What's the connection between them? Pardon? They were non-violent. Sorry?
Swimming against the flow.
They were. Yeah. Right. Tolstoy lived at a difficult time. No, well, no, I don't think he was at the time. His writings and personal letters to Gandhi influenced what he did in India. Right? Tolstoy was dead by the time Martin Luther King came along, but Luther King and Gandhi had a connection. Gandhi influenced Luther King because he'd been influenced by Tolstoy. Right? Tolstoy, he wrote a series of pamphlets I haven't read enough of his. I'd like to read some more, but I don't get much time. But in this one, he's describing, because there was a cry in Russia for anarchy, and he was arguing against it, right? And his argument, much longer than I can put here. The link is on the page I've got if you want to read it. It's not a long read, but he says, both these things being firmly closed and impregnable, what remains to be done? To utilize violence is impossible. It was only cause a reaction. I had this written when we had the outbreak of protests that turned into violence in England at the beginning of August, right? That is what happens. You use violence, you use aggression, you get a reaction. But he also says to join the ranks of government is also impossible. One would only become its instrument. And he's speaking from personal experience here. Of course, one course therefore remains: to fight the government by means of thought, speech, actions, life, neither yielding to government nor joining its ranks, and thereby increasing its power. This alone is needed, will certainly be successful. So he says, when the government pressurizes you, anarchy is not the solution. Passive resistance, determined is this resistance is. But in case you don't know this, there's another line which is an extra slide, because that's where he ended up on the other slide. And then he says, and this is the will of God and the teaching of Christ. Right? Tolstoy challenged the common interpretation of Romans 13. I think it is Romans 13, because I actually also think the translation is poor. Right? I believe if we were to just bend the knee before civil government without testing what they're saying as whether it fits with God, Peter would have not preached when he was released from prison. Right? Paul didn't mean that. That verse should be translated, obey the higher authorities. Authority. Let me give you a quick illustration. Pretend you're a private in an army, right? And you're just walking out of the barracks and a sergeant comes up to you and says, private, go and do this. And you go off and do it. 10 minutes into the job, a colonel comes up to you and says, private, whatever you're doing, forget it, go and do that. Which one do you obey? The higher ranking one, right? And if while you're doing that job, a general comes along and tells you to do something different, you obey the higher authority. All government is given by God. So who is the higher authority? God, right? You're not obeying God if you're obeying a government that's in rebellion to him, right? You have to obey the higher authority. I'm happy to take questions later and so on. Right. So we're back here again. Did the incarnate Son of God live a countercultural life? The whole of John's Gospel, well, much of John's Gospel until you get to about chapter 14, is Jesus arguing against the culture of the Pharisees who hated him for not living like they did. They wanted a culture of a particular type, and he didn't fit in with it. Oh, by the way, when I showed this before, did anybody notice anything about the man who's going countercultural that makes him different besides his direction and his colour? He's carrying a book. I have to confess, when I grabbed this graphic off the internet, I didn't look at the source. Right? The dad who drew that as a sermon illustration is an American homeschooler. I'll call him a homeschooler, seeing he's there. And he's got, and there's a link now on the second page that I'll show you in a minute to that page, but it was broken in the last couple of days. I'll see if we can get it mended. If not, I've got a copy of the audio. And he's even encouraging homeschooling parents in the States to live more countercultural as Christians than they are doing. So I thoroughly recommend that audio. And I confess that I didn't check out where the source when I first grabbed the graphic. But yes, it is a Bible, and it's from a sermon where he's saying Western Christians do not live countercultural enough. So I think you know my answer to that. I don't believe we do, but I believe we ought to do it for our own sake and the well-being of our children. Now, at this point, I want to say I do not believe that we are under the law, right? I'm going to quote some of the law, but I don't believe we're under it. But I do believe, as Paul says, things about Israel were written for our instruction so we can learn by them. They happened as an example for us. And I also believe that Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. And we're told there's no shadow caused by God turning. So God's character is always the same. And the law teaches us about God's character. Now, some time ago in the 90s, I was at a national prayer leaders conference. And how many of you have ever heard the phrase the prodigals? No. Okay, they wanted to pray for the prodigals. What they meant was all the people there and all the people in the churches whose children were no longer part of the faith. And they wanted to pray for them. And they said to us, go away, ask God for a verse, and then come and pray to it tonight. That's the verse I got. You know lead balloons? That should be my middle name. Right? Your sons and your daughters shall be given to another people. And yet, while your eyes look on them and yearn continually, but there'll be nothing you can do. Oh, by the way, I didn't say this at F. This is for you lot. Look, do you know the context of Deuteronomy 28? It starts with all the wonderful blessings that God says to Israel. If you obey me, if you listen to my voice and obey me, I'll do all these great things for you. And that's about a third of the chapter. The rest of the chapter is about what happens if they don't listen to him. It's actually a repetition of Leviticus 26. And if you want a better understanding of the Old Testament, I'll give you a clue. Read Leviticus 26, read Deuteronomy 28, and then whenever a prophet is speaking in the rest of the Old Testament, see how many times he is actually quoting from those two chapters. In fact, tell me, what's the context of 2 Chronicles 7:14? Do you know 2 Chronicles 7:14? What is it? Right, what's the context? Now you see, dedication, but what is it? What part of the dedication of the temple is it? Right? No, that is God answering King Solomon. Right? In the dedication of the temple, Solomon actually quotes Leviticus 26 about the people being taken off into exile if they go away from God. And he says, if your people disobey you and you send them into a foreign land and they humble themselves and look at this house, look towards this house and pray, will you bring them back? And later when God answers, he says, yes, I'll do that, because that's what's in the scriptures. That's what I've already told you. And it's about God's relationship with Israel. I can't go into it. But look, context is everything. And that passage comes from Leviticus 26 through Deuteronomy 28, and it does not apply to secular Western nations. It only applies in that situation. I'm not going on that one more. But here, right? This is also there. Do you remember when Israel said, we're fed up of being ruled by God, we want a king? And Samuel went, And God said to him, look, Samuel, it's not you that they're stropping with, it's me. They have given up on me. They've rejected me. By the way, it took them till they said to Pilate, we have no king but Caesar, to finally crown that one. But they did that. But he said, you go and tell them things. And the first thing Samuel told them, if they wanted a king, is that this is what a king would do when he reigns over you. He will take your sons and place them for himself in chariots and among his horsemen, and they will run before his chariots. He will appoint himself commanders of thousands and fifties, and they'll make him go and work in his fields, etc., etc. And he will also take your daughters for perfumers and cooks and bakers. You see, when people don't want to follow God with a whole heart, one of the things they forfeit is their relationship with their children. And others take them. Foreigners take them. Daniel was taken from his family as a 14, 15-year-old into Babylon. That was a fulfillment of Leviticus 26. The king has workers.